The
darkness.
city is lost!
Then,
Run!
fire.
Fight for
Not the
Rome,
controlled
hold the
fire
line.
of a hearth or a torch.
Save
The
yourselves,
wild,
it's
consuming
over!
kind that
No
swallows
retreat, we
buildings
die
whole
standing.
and turns the night sky the color of rage. This is Rome in its final hours. The year is 476 AD. The streets that once carried the weight of 1,000,000 lives are empty now, or filled with the wrong kind of sound. Not the roar of crowds and commerce, but the low, defeated murmur of a city that has forgotten what it was. Smoke rises from the Forum. The great marble temples, cracked and stripped of their gold, stand like bones above the ruin. A soldier, not Roman, his armor foreign and rough, walks through the silence with the dazed look of a man who has taken something he doesn't fully understand. He steps over a fallen column. He doesn't look up. He has no reason to know what he's walking through. But we do. We have come here not to watch the ending. We have come to understand it. To travel backward through the fire, through the centuries, through the blood and the marble, and the impossible ambition, to a small group of people beside a river who had nothing but hunger and will. This is not a story about how Rome fell. This is the story of how it lived. Before the empire, before the republic, before even the first stone wall, there was the Tiber, a wide, brown, unhurried river running through the center of the Italian peninsula, indifferent to the hills around it, and the people beginning to settle upon them. It is approximately 1000 BC. The land is not yet Roman because Rome does not yet exist. What exists are scattered Latin-speaking communities, farmers, herders, people who planted grain and prayed to local gods and built their houses from wood and mud brick because stone required tools they were still learning to use. The settlement that would become Rome was not chosen for grandeur. It was chosen for survival. 7 hills above a river crossing, defensible from above, accessible from below, positioned at a natural ford that traders had been using for generations. Geography made the decision before people did. Over generations, these hilltop villages began to press together. Through trade, conflict, and the slow gravity of proximity, they became something more coherent, a community with shared walls and shared customs, and eventually a shared story. That story, the one Romans would eventually tell about themselves, began with 2 brothers, a she-wolf and a murder. It was a founding myth built on fratricide. Perhaps that was the first honest thing Rome ever said about itself. Romulus killed Remus over a wall. The details of the myth shift depending on who tells it, but the shape stays the same. One brother builds, the other mocks or challenges, and the builder kills to protect what he has made. In 753 BC, according to Roman tradition, Romulus became the first king of Rome. He named the city after himself. He filled it with outcasts, refugees, and runaway slaves, men without families or homes who needed a place to become something. He gave them walls. He gave them law. He gave them wars to fight against the neighboring tribes who quickly understood that this new settlement was not going to stay small. The early centuries are dark to us, not metaphorically, but historically. Few records survive. What we have are traces, the outlines of buildings, the patterns of burials, the linguistic fossils of a society learning what it was. Rome was ruled by kings for nearly 2.5 centuries. 7 kings by tradition, some likely legendary, some probable composites, all of them building the institutional bones of a city that was still deciding what it wanted to be. The last king, Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, gave Rome its republic by being precisely the kind of man who makes people desperate for something different. His name and what it meant would echo for 500 years. In 509 BC, the Romans did something remarkable. They threw out their king, not just replaced him, but abolished the institution entirely, and replaced monarchy with a system so carefully engineered to prevent any single person from holding too much power that it would shape political theory for the next 2,000 years. 2 consuls elected annually, each with the power to veto the other. A senate of experienced men advising and constraining them. Magistrates for every function of governance, each serving limited terms, each accountable to the next. The Romans called it res publica, the public thing. The republic. It was imperfect from the beginning. The Senate was dominated by patricians, the old aristocratic families, and the plebeian majority spent centuries fighting, incrementally, for the rights that should have been theirs from the start. But the framework held. The system creaked and bent under pressure, and was periodically reformed, and bent again, and was reformed again. And through all of it, Rome expanded. The Latin neighbors first, then the Italian peninsula. Each war teaching lessons the next generation applied. Each defeat, and there were catastrophic defeats, absorbed and responded to with the specific stubbornness of a culture that had decided, somewhere in its collective character, that stopping was not acceptable. Carthage was an ancient city on the North African coast that had built a maritime empire, while Rome was still learning to field a navy. By the 3rd century BC, these two powers were inevitable enemies, controlling the same sea, wanting the same trade routes, representing fundamentally different visions of how the Mediterranean world should be organized. The First Punic War began in 264 BC and lasted 23 years. Rome, with almost no naval tradition, built a fleet from scratch using a captured Carthaginian ship as a blueprint. They lost fleets to storms. They rebuilt. They lost again. They rebuilt again. The stubbornness was not accidental. It was doctrine. The Second Punic War brought Hannibal Barca. He crossed the Alps in winter with an army and war elephants, descended into northern Italy, and delivered Rome 3 of the worst military defeats in its history, including Cannae, where approximately 50,000 Romans died in a single afternoon. Rome did not surrender. It absorbed the loss, restructured, refused to give Hannibal the decisive engagement he needed, and eventually took the war to Africa. Scipio Africanus defeated Hannibal at Zama in 202 BC. The lesson of the Punic Wars was not tactical, it was psychological. Rome had discovered that it could survive almost anything. That discovery would eventually become dangerous. By the 2nd century BC, Rome controlled the western Mediterranean and was pushing east. Macedonia fell, Greece was absorbed. The kings of the Hellenistic world, the successor states of Alexander's empire, were swept aside one by Roman legions that had been sharpened by generations of war into something the ancient world had not seen before. The Roman legion was not just a military unit, it was a system. Standardized equipment, standardized training, a command structure that balanced discipline with initiative. The ability to build a fortified camp at the end of every march so that Roman soldiers slept behind walls even in enemy territory. The ability to besiege cities, cross rivers, supply themselves across vast distances, and at the center of it, the legionary himself. A professional soldier who had signed on for 25 years and expected to fight in every climate the empire could produce. He carried 60 pounds of equipment. He marched 20 miles a day. He built roads and aqueducts when he wasn't fighting. He was, simultaneously, the most destructive and the most constructive force in the ancient world. When people in the provinces heard the news that a Roman army was coming, they had to decide very quickly, resist and face what armies do, or open the gates and become Roman. Most eventually opened the gates. Wealth changed Rome. It had been a city of farmers, austere, religious, suspicious of luxury. The conquest of Greece in the east flooded the Republic with slaves, gold, grain, and ideas. Senators built villas. Markets overflowed. The old families grew richer. The small farmers, the backbone of the legions, the men who had actually done the conquering, came home to find their land bought up by wealthy landowners who had worked it with slaves while the soldiers were away. They drifted to the cities. They became the urban poor. And the urban poor, in a republic where political power still notionally resided in popular assemblies, became a force that ambitious men could use. The Gracchi brothers tried to address the inequality through land reform. Both were killed by the senatorial class they were threatening. Their deaths announced something the Republic had not yet admitted, that the system designed to prevent one man from gaining too much power was being corrupted by money, and that the violence suppressed for generations was beginning to surface. The Republic would survive another century after the Gracchi, but the cracks were there. And into those cracks, over the following decades, ambitious men began to insert themselves, soldiers with armies loyal to them personally, commanders who understood that the old rules applied only to people who chose to follow them. Marius reformed the army and saved Rome from a Germanic invasion. Sulla marched his legions into Rome itself, the first time a Roman general had done the unthinkable, and used military force to reshape the political order. Their conflict produced decades of civil war that exhausted the Republic and demonstrated repeatedly that the rules governing Roman politics could be suspended by any man willing to use his army as a political instrument. From this soil grew Julius Caesar. He was born in 100 BC into a patrician family of modest wealth and enormous ambition. He was brilliant in the specific, dangerous way of men who understand that most systems are built by people less intelligent than he was. He was a politician before he was a general, understanding that popularity, debt, and spectacle could build political capital as efficiently as victory.
He sells false gold. It's a fraud.
He financed
Lies.
gladiatorial games for the public.
Enough.
He built
will be
public
judged fairly.
works. He
As you say,
accumulated
I do.
debts he
I
couldn't
agree.
pay,
No more trouble.
which
Fellow
meant his
Romans, the
creditors
time for
needed him
action
to
is
succeed
now.
as much
Our
as he
enemies
did.
gather strength while we deliberate.
His
I
campaigns
have
in Gaul over
inscribed
10
here the
years
path
were a
to
masterpiece of
Let us
military
unite and
ruthlessness
seize our
dressed as
destiny.
civilizing mission. He fought over 200 battles. He enslaved over 1 million people. He sent dispatches to Rome that turned him into a legend while he was still alive. And then, in 49 BC, he crossed the Rubicon. The Rubicon was a small river in northern Italy. It was also a legal boundary. Roman law forbade a general from crossing it with his army because an army inside Italy was the definition of civil war. Caesar crossed it anyway. He said, or was said to have said, "The die is cast." In the year that followed, the Republic tore itself apart. Caesar's enemies, Pompey, the Senate, the defenders of the old order, were defeated one by one with a speed that still astonishes military historians. Caesar was not simply a general. He was a force of nature given organizational form. He arrived at battles before his enemies expected him. He made decisions faster than his opponents could respond to them. He offered mercy to defeated enemies, which was unusual and which built him a coalition of reconciled rivals who owed him their lives. By 44 BC, he was dictator perpetuo, dictator in perpetuity. He wore a purple robe. He sat on a golden chair. He looked, to men who had grown up inside the Republic's ideology, exactly like a king. On the Ides of March, they killed him. 23 stab wounds. The Senate floor. His body fell at the feet of a statue of Pompey, his defeated rival, in a detail that history has always seemed too perfect to have been accidental. The assassination solved nothing. It produced only more war. Caesar's adopted son Octavian, 19 years old, unknown, underestimated, emerged from the chaos with a political intelligence that made his father look impatient. He moved carefully. He formed alliances he needed and discarded them when they had served their purpose. He defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, the last and greatest of Rome's civil wars. And then he did what Julius Caesar, for all his genius, had failed to do. He did not call himself king. He called himself princeps, first citizen. He kept all the forms of the Republic while hollowing them of actual power. The Senate still met. Consuls were still elected. The old machinery still turned. But every significant decision flowed through one man. He changed his name. He became Augustus. In 27 BC, the Roman Empire began, not with a declaration, not with a crown, but with a careful, systematic reorganization of power that disguised revolution as restoration. Augustus ruled for 44 years. He ended the civil wars. He reformed the army, the administration, the taxation system, the physical infrastructure of the city. He found Rome a city of brick, he said, and left it a city of marble. Under him, Rome exhaled and began the longest period of prosperity and peace it would ever know. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, lasted in its fullest sense approximately 2 centuries. From Augustus to the death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 AD, Rome was the organizing principle of the known world. At its peak, the empire stretched from the Scottish Highlands to the Mesopotamian desert, from the Atlantic coast of Portugal to the Black Sea. 60 million people lived under Roman administration, a population that would not be reached again in Europe for over 1,000 years. Life inside the empire was unlike anything the ancient world had produced before. Romans built cities everywhere they went, not just military outposts, but genuine urban centers with forums, temples, bathhouses, amphitheaters, and water systems. The aqueducts carried clean water to city populations across 3 continents. The roads, engineered with a precision that would not be matched until the modern era, connected every corner of the empire to every other. Trade moved along them in volumes that are still staggering. Grain from Egypt, silk from China via Parthia, glass from Syria, olive oil from Spain, spices from India. In the markets of Rome, you could buy goods from 100 different cultures without leaving the city. The empire was not simply a military achievement, it was the most sophisticated commercial and administrative organism the ancient world had ever produced. Walk with us now into the city itself. Not the Rome of monuments and political abstractions, but the Rome of living people. The city of approximately 1 million inhabitants at its peak, a number that made it the largest city on Earth for centuries. The streets are narrow and loud. 6-story apartment buildings, insula, crowd the sky, their upper floors sagging slightly under their own weight, their occupants living 4 to 6 people in a single room. The ground floors house shops, bakers already working before dawn, their bread displayed in round stone shelves still visible in the ruins of Pompeii. Wine merchants, olive oil traders, metal workers whose hammering never quite stops. The smell is complex: bread and animals and waste and cooking, and the specific mineral smell of stone that has been warm all summer. The wealthy live differently. Behind the apartment blocks, behind the noise, the domus, the private house, turns its face inward. A central courtyard open to the sky, a garden with a fountain, mosaic floors depicting myths and sea creatures. The household shrine to the lares, the ancestors, where the family gathers in the morning. Slaves moving through every room because in Rome, even middle-class households have slaves. The empire's prosperity rests on their bodies. This is the part of the Reconstruction that does not make us comfortable. It should not. The Colosseum was dedicated in 80 AD under the Emperor Titus. 50,000 people could sit inside it. The engineering required to build it, the concrete, the arches, the retractable awning system, the complex of tunnels and cages and hydraulic mechanisms beneath the arena floor, was a demonstration of what Roman civilization could do when it directed its full resources toward a single project. What happened inside was a demonstration of something else. Gladiatorial combat was not simply entertainment. It was theology, politics, and social control expressed as spectacle. The crowds who filled the Colosseum were citizens who had been fed state grain and given state entertainment, bread and circuses, as the satirist Juvenal wrote, with the specific bitterness of a man who understood what was being traded. The emperor appeared in his box, and the crowd roared. He gave signals of mercy or death, and the crowd interpreted those signals as evidence of his character. The games were a mirror in which Roman power looked at itself and saw a reflection it had chosen. Gladiators were largely slaves and condemned criminals. Some became famous, their images painted on walls, their names shouted in the streets. A few earned their freedom, most did not. The sand was changed between bouts. Beneath the arena, the machinery of death moved on iron rails. The crowd went home. The city ate its dinner. Tomorrow there would be more. The emperors. We cannot tell the story of Rome without them, their brilliance, their madness, their capacity for both. Augustus set a standard no one who followed him fully met. Tiberius was competent and paranoid, retreating to Capri, while Rome was governed by shadows. Caligula lasted 4 years before his own guards killed him. The stories about him are so extreme that historians still debate how much is true and how much is character assassination. Claudius, the stammering uncle nobody took seriously, turned out to be a capable administrator who expanded the empire into Britain. Nero burned with ambition and paranoia. Whether he burned Rome is debated, but he certainly blamed the Christians for it, producing the first state persecution of that religion. The year of the 4 emperors. Vespasian, who built the Colosseum. Domitian, feared and competent in equal measure. And then, in 96 AD, a shift. The Senate chose Nerva, an elderly, respected man with no biological heirs, and Nerva chose Trajan, a general from Spain who would become one of the greatest emperors in Roman history. Trajan chose Hadrian, who chose Antoninus Pius, who chose Marcus Aurelius. The 5 good emperors, the philosopher on the throne, the empire at its widest and most thoughtful, the last good century. Trajan pushed the empire to its greatest territorial extent, conquering Dacia, modern Romania, and briefly reaching the Persian Gulf. His column in Rome still stands, its continuous spiral relief carving telling the story of his campaigns in stone. When he died, his successor Hadrian made the decision that would define the 2nd century. Stop expanding. Consolidate. Build walls at the edges, including the famous wall across northern Britain that still bears his name, and accept that the empire had reached the limits of what it could administer. This was wisdom.
The
It was
empire
also, in
fractures before
retrospect,
us.
the beginning
It
of a
is your
different
weakness
phase.
that divides us.
An empire that
We
stops
must reunite
expanding
or
must defend
fall.
what it has.
Then let the stronger claim
Defense costs
prevail.
money. Money comes from taxes. Taxes require administration. Administration requires trust. Trust requires good emperors. The system was always only as strong as the man at its center, and for a century, the men were extraordinary. Marcus Aurelius wrote philosophy in his tent between campaigns. He believed in duty, reason, and the common good of all people. He was also the last emperor to choose his successor wisely. He chose his son, Commodus. Commodus believed he was the reincarnation of Hercules. He fought in the arena, dressing as a gladiator and killing crippled men presented as giants, and charged the city for each appearance. When he was strangled in his bath in 192 AD, no one mourned him, but the damage was done. The 3rd century almost destroyed Rome. Between 235 and 284 AD, a period historians call the crisis of the 3rd century, the empire had over 50 emperors, most of whom died violently. The Praetorian Guard, originally the emperor's personal protectors, had discovered that they could make and unmake emperors at will, auctioning the throne to the highest bidder on at least one occasion. External pressure intensified. Germanic tribes pushed at the Rhine and Danube frontiers with a persistence that earlier Roman armies had contained but could no longer fully stop. Plague moved through the empire in waves, killing millions. The economy contracted. The currency was debased. Silver coins became mostly copper, producing inflation that hit the poor with the specific violence that inflation always produces, eating savings and destroying the predictability on which ordinary life depends. And yet, Rome survived. Diocletian, who became emperor in 284 AD, understood that the empire was too large for one man to govern. He split it administratively, reformed the army, restructured the tax system, and imposed price controls. His reforms were only partially successful, but they stabilized the crisis. He also launched the last and most severe persecution of Christians in Roman history. Then he retired, voluntarily, the only emperor to do so, to his palace in modern-day Croatia, where he grew cabbages, and when asked to return to power, reportedly said he wished they could see his cabbages. Constantine changed everything. In 312 AD, before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, which would determine who controlled Rome, he reported a vision. A Christian symbol in the sky, a command to fight under it. He won the battle. He credited the Christian God. Whether the vision was real or political calculation, the consequence was the most significant religious shift in Western history. The Edict of Milan in 313 AD granted religious tolerance throughout the empire. Christianity, which had been periodically persecuted, was suddenly not only tolerated but favored. The emperor built churches. He called councils to resolve theological disputes. He moved the capital east, to Byzantium, renamed Constantinople, the city that would survive as the Eastern Roman Empire for another 1,000 years after Rome itself fell. The old gods did not disappear immediately. The temples still stood. The sacrifices continued in some places for decades. But the weight of imperial favor was enormous, and favor had always been the currency that mattered most in Rome. By the end of the 4th century, Christianity was the official religion of the empire, and the ancient religious world of Rome, the gods, the mysteries, the centuries of accumulated prayer, was being dismantled with the same thoroughness Rome had brought to everything else. History had turned. The empire that crucified Jesus had become, in 3 centuries, the vehicle of his religion. The barbarians are a story told badly by most tellings. They were not savages descending on civilization from outside. Many of them were already inside the empire, serving as soldiers, settling as farmers, integrating over generations into the Roman system while maintaining their own cultures. The problem was not their foreignness. The problem was structural. The Western Empire in the 5th century was being asked to defend a vast frontier with an army that was shrinking, using a tax base that was contracting, governed by an emperor whose authority was increasingly theoretical. Alaric's Visigoth army sacked Rome in 410 AD. The city had not been taken by an enemy in 800 years. The psychological shock throughout the empire, throughout the Christian world, was enormous. Augustine began writing The City of God partly as a response to the pagans who blamed Christianity for Rome's weakness. Jerome, in Bethlehem, wrote that he could not speak for weeping. Rome recovered. It was not destroyed in 410. It was humiliated, looted, and left standing. But the direction was clear. The Western emperors became figureheads. Real power rested with military commanders, often themselves of barbarian origin, who governed in the emperor's name while making all significant decisions themselves. Aetius, called the last of the Romans, held the West together for decades through a combination of military genius and desperate alliance-making until his emperor had him killed. Rome was running out of Romans to save it. Attila the Hun arrived from the east like a force the ancient world had no category for. He did not want to govern Rome. He wanted its gold, its submission, its acknowledgement that he was the most powerful man in the world. His campaigns in the 440s and 450s devastated the Balkans and threatened both halves of the empire. At the Battle of the Catalonian Plains in 451 AD, Aetius and his coalition of Roman and Gothic forces stopped the Hunnic advance, one of the rare moments in late Roman history where the West found its old coherence. Attila died in 453, reportedly of a nosebleed on his wedding night, an ending that history seems to have arranged for ironic purposes. His empire fragmented immediately without him, but the relief was brief. Aetius was murdered by Emperor Valentinian III in 454 AD. Valentinian was murdered by Aetius's friends in 455 AD. And then the Vandals, sailing from North Africa, sacked Rome for 2 weeks, more thoroughly than Alaric. The last 50 years of the Western Empire are a chronicle of diminishment so rapid it is almost difficult to follow. Emperors replaced in months, territory given up, taxes that could no longer be collected, cities that simply emptied. In 476 AD, Odoacer, a Germanic chieftain leading what remained of the Roman army, deposed the last Western emperor, a 16-year-old boy named Romulus Augustulus. The name was almost too symbolic to be true. Almost. And so we return to where we began. The fire, the empty streets, the soldier who walks through marble without knowing what marble means. The year is 476 AD, and that Western Roman Empire has ended. Not with a final battle, not with a declaration, but with a quiet deposition that almost no one in the empire noticed at the time. The Eastern Empire continued. Constantinople would survive for another 1,000 years, preserving Roman law, Roman administration, and the Greek learning Rome had absorbed until the Ottoman cannons breached the Theodosian walls in 1453. Rome's influence did not end with Rome. Its language became the root of French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian, and the scaffolding of English. Its law is the foundation of legal systems across Europe and the Americas. Its roads shaped the geography of cities that still exist. Its architectural forms, the arch, the vault, the dome, are in every skyline. Its political vocabulary, Senate, Republic, Constitution, is still the vocabulary of governance. Its religion, Christianity, which it first persecuted and then adopted, shaped the next 2,000 years of human history more than any other single force. Rome fell. Rome also never stopped. The soldier walks through the fire, and we watch him go, and we understand something now that he cannot. He is not walking through an ending. He is walking through a transformation. Everything around him is becoming something else. It always was.